As a special assignment to celebrate the 150th anniversary, the students in our schools were given an essay contest challenge. They were to write a history of one of the towns in the county. The best essay on each town was chosen by the county commissioners. The winners are here today to present their essays. May I present Miss Evans, our essay contest teacher.
Good evening, class.
Good evening, Miss Evans.
Each of you is a winner in the essay contest. Tonight, you have the honor of presenting your papers to the radio audience. Let's start with Lacaparo Village.
Lacaparo Village was the first real town in the county. I guess anyone can declare a place to be a town, like William Mills did, when he said that the town was on his property and he named it Williamsburg. But it didn't last very long. Lacaparo Village had the first post office in 1871 and the first school in 1872.
During its early years, the village was growing with more and more people coming to live there, starting businesses and building homes. It had a general store, a furniture store, hardware store, drugstore, an art gallery, restaurant, even attorneys, school, bank, a newspaper, the Lacaparo Press, and an implement dealership, among other businesses. It was thriving.
Then the railroad came through and bypassed Lacaparo Village. Many of the businessmen took their buildings and moved either to Dawson or Madison. Lacaparo Village came up with an idea to sell bonds to bring a branch of the railroad to the village. Many of the most prominent citizens of the town signed off on the bonding resolution in 1888. But evidently it didn't get funded, as no railroad was ever built there.
The town became a very quiet little place, and today has no businesses, but it still is a wonderful little place to live at.
Next, let's have Lewisburg.
When the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railway, which became Great Northern Railroad, decided to build a line across the northern part of Lacaparo County, towns developed along that railroad. Lewisburg was one of them. It was platted in 1887 on land owned by Ole Thompson. He named the town for his father, Lewis Thompson, and it was officially called Lewisburg. Lewisburg never had a newspaper and never had a high school, but it did have a school for grades 1 through 8. It was active with numerous businesses in the early days, but it never was a large town. But small towns are great communities. Here are some quotes from Lewisburg's Centennial book.
A small town is where you dial a wrong number and talk for 15 minutes anyway. A small town is where you take a walk and every car that passes offers you a ride. A small town is where you run your car in the ditch and the news gets back to town before you do. You know you're in a small town when people know you by your nickname. You know you're in a small town when people know where you live without having addresses in the phone book.
Lewisburg had many businesses in its early days. There were stores, a bank, restaurant, saloon, and a school. The school was built in 1911 and closed in 1970. There were plans to build a high school, but when Appleton and Bellingham started bus service around 1930, those plans collapsed. It built its own light plant in 1917 and had telephone service provided by Central Telephone Company around the turn of the century. A wooden church was built in 1891 and was destroyed by a tornado in 1905. A new wood church was built in 1916 and in 1926 was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. In 1927, this time a brick church was built and worship services are still held there. Lewisburg always had a great community spirit. When the restaurant closed, The farmers got together and put up the money to reopen it. It was run by Harold and Emily Hansen for many years before it finally closed for good.
Great report. Next, Bellingham.
Just like Lewisburg, Bellingham was built along the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railroad in 1887. And just like Lac-Qui-Parle Village, people owned the town site. One couple were representatives of the railroad. The railroad always had their own people involved in building of towns so that they could get some of the profit from it. The other owners were Charles and Phoebe Bellingham, who owned the land where the railroad wanted to build the town. It is named for Charles Bellingham.
Bellingham had a newspaper called the Bellingham Gazette that was published in 1889, but it is the Bellingham Times that was more well known. It was published from 1891 to 1942.
Bellingham also had a very active school. Its first school was built in 1881 with a 2-year high school added in 1898 and a 4-year high school in 1912. Bus service was offered by 1936. Students had to pay to ride the bus, $3 a month for one student, $5 a month for 2 students. But as the years passed, the number of children living in the Bellingham area decreased, and the high school closed in 2007, with the elementary school closing in 2010.
There was a very popular kitchen band in Bellingham called the Kitchenettes, which started in 1972. They played kazoos, kitchen utensils, and other unique instruments. They even played at the state capitol and twice at the state fair.
Before we go on with the rest of your reports, I would like to introduce a very special guest who has agreed to join us today, Father Peter Rosen. Did you know that the community of Rosen was named after him? Well, he will tell us a little history of that community.
Guten Tag, Jungs und Mädels. I came to the United States from a part of Germany called Prussia as a Catholic priest and missionary. I spent much of my time in South Dakota, in and near the Black Hills. However, in 1895, I was sent to the northwestern part of Lac-Qui-Parle County because the number of German Catholics had settled there and had no church. So on the prairie lands of Yellow Bank Township, a church was built. There was a smaller church first and then a brick church in 1907 after I'd already left. It was the United States Post Office that gave the community the name of Rosen in 1897. The post office may have well been named Rosen on the suggestion of the area residents. The first postmaster was Philip Carls, who built the first home in the community. I wanted Rosen to become an actual town, so I encouraged older farmers ready to retire to build homes around the church, and they did.
There was a store in Rosen, first owned by Philip Carls and then by John Stoll. The store carried dry goods, groceries, and notions. In 1953, Leonard and Norman Schmig built a new general store. There was quite a number of businesses in Rosen through the years, including a Firestone tire shop and a TV shop. There was also a Catholic school built in 1927 that closed in 1979.
Rosen had a cornet band, which I organized when I was the parish priest. The band played at the laying of the cornerstone when the courthouse was built in Madison. Its members erected the village hall in Rosen. The band was very civic-minded and worked hard to make Rosen a community. However, the band dissolved in 1914. And baseball, oh, does Rosen love its baseball. A baseball team was formed early in Rosen's history, and baseball is still being played today. Thank you for allowing me to tell you about Rosen. If you wish to read more about me and my writings, I'm in the archives at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. Now, Auf Wiedersehen.
That was so interesting. Thank you, Father Rosen. Let's hear from NASA.
Nassau, like Lewisburg and Bellingham, started along the railroad. A fellow by the name of Michael Mason settled what would become Nassau in 1887, at the time the Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Manitoba Railroad was being built. He had a grain business, a general store, a hotel, and he was also a farmer. He was quite the businessman. Another gentleman, W.G. Mix, arrived in 1893. He helped organize the village and became the town's first mayor. He was also a hardware merchant.
A couple of newspapers were started, the Nassau Advertiser in 1904 and the Nassau Review newspaper in 1916, but no newspaper permanently took hold in the town. There were once 3 churches, a Congregational Church, St. James Catholic Church, and the St. Paul Lutheran Church. The St. James Catholic Church was closed and its building became the community center.
A school started in Nassau in 1888 and at one point had 2 years of high school. In 1958, 7th and 8th graders began attending school in Marietta with grades 1 through 6 taught in Nassau. The school closed in 1968 when Nassau and Marietta consolidated. Then, when Marietta consolidated with Madison, all students began attending school in Madison. In 1989, a monument was built where the front doors of the school once were.
At one time, there was a community brass band, a baseball team, the Independent Order of Oddfellows, the Woodman's Lodge, Catholic Order of Foresters, Royal Neighbors, and Rebecca Lodge. The town seemed very community-minded. There was even the Nassau Dramatic Club. Though there are not a lot of businesses left in Nassau, it is a very important hub for farmers to sell their grain at the elevator and get their machinery from Walden Implement.
Thank you. And now, Boyd.
Boyd was found earlier than the towns you have just heard about it. That's because Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad came through the area in 1884. The town was named after Samuel F. Boyd, ticket agent for the railroad.
It eventually had its own electric plant and its own telephone company, the Boyd Telephone Company. By 1916, Boyd had a restaurant, 2 banks, 5 grain elevators, a flour mill, at least 2 general stores, any type of store you could want, from hardware to clothing to photography to builders. It had a hotel, a doctor, a veterinarian, a school, a newspaper, and churches. It had a population of about 600. There was even a golf course started in 1925, but it ended during the Depression.
Its newspaper was the Boyd Bulletin that started in 1897. That newspaper was published until 1954. In 1954, the Boyd Advisor was started. When the owner retired, the paper ceased.
Boyd was on the all-important railroad line. Some people tried to start the Ku Klux Klan in Boyd in the 1920s. 2 crosses were burned to show their power. One on a lady's lawn while she was entertaining. Not sure what the problem was with her, but the people of Boyd did not support that organization, for it did not last long. Boyd School merged with Dawson Public School in 1969 for grades 9 through 12. 1970-71 for 7th and 8th, and in 1979 for the elementary school.
Thank you.